My sister-in-law shamed my gentle parenting style at a family gathering, calling my son a whiner. She was desperate to get her Whiner sons into an elite school. So I made a quiet phone call and used the money no one knew I had to ensure another, more deserving child got the last spot instead. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of summer was supposed to be a happy thing. It should have been about freshly cut grass, sizzling burgers on the grill, and the sweet, sticky smell of watermelon. But that Sunday, all I could smell was the cloying, expensive perfume my sister-in-law, Vanessa, wore like a suit of armor. It was a scent that announced her arrival long before her sharp, clicking heels hit the patio stones, a fragrance that seemed to suck the very air out of our relaxed family barbecue. My husband, Thomas, and I had been looking forward to this day. It was his parents' anniversary, a casual get-together meant to be low stress and full of laughter. Our 7-year-old son, Samuel, was happily occupied in a corner of the yard, not with a ball or a toy weapon, but with a sketchpad and a set of colored pencils, his small brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to capture the exact shade of a monarch butterfly that had landed on a marigold. He was a quiet storm of creativity, a gentle soul in a world that often felt too loud. Honestly, Eden, you're going to let him just sit there? Vanessa's voice sliced through the calm. She was standing behind my lawn chair, a perfectly manicured hand holding a glass of white wine, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of faint disapproval. He should be running around, building character. Look at my boys. She gestured with her glass toward her own sons, Jackson and Blade. They were rampaging near the rose bushes, engaged in a mock battle with large sticks that looked dangerously close to taking out my mother-in-law's prize-winning blooms. Jackson, the elder at 8, was shouting orders, while 6-year-old Blade swung his stick with a ferocity that was frankly alarming. They were loud, they were aggressive, and in Vanessa's eyes, they were perfect. They were winners. "He's happy, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice even. "He loves to draw." "He loves to hide," she corrected, taking a sip of her wine. "There's a difference. You're too soft on him. This whole gentle parenting thing you do, it's a fad. You're raising a whiner, not a winner. The world eats up whiners for breakfast." I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. This was not a new conversation. It was a recurring theme, a constant undercurrent in every interaction we had. My quiet, introverted nature, my belief in fostering kindness and emotional intelligence in my son, was a direct affront to her entire worldview. She saw my life, my comfortable but modest home, my work-from-home job as a UX designer, my preference for a quiet evening over a loud party, as a colossal failure of ambition. Thomas, ever the peacemaker, walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Okay, Van, let's not start," he said with a weak smile. He was a good man, my Thomas, a high school history teacher with a deep love for the past and a deep-seated aversion to present-day conflict with his sister. Vanessa just scoffed, turning her attention back to her children. "I'm just saying, Thomas, you need to think about the future. Jackson and Blade have their interviews for Northwood Prep next week. We're setting them up for success. We're teaching them to be competitive, to dominate. What are you teaching Samuel? How to color inside the lines." The mention of Northwood Preparatory Academy hung in the air. It was the most exclusive, most prestigious private school in the state, a place that was less an educational institution and more a gateway to a certain kind of life. For Vanessa, getting her sons into Northwood was everything. It was the ultimate status symbol, the validation of her entire philosophy on life and parenting. She talked about it incessantly, about the legacy, the network, the sheer power of having Northwood on a diploma. Later, as we were cutting the anniversary cake, the incident that would change everything occurred. Samuel, wanting to show his grandmother the finished drawing of the butterfly, had carefully walked across the lawn. Blade, in a whirlwind of chaotic energy, hadn't been looking where he was going and barreled directly into him. Samuel stumbled, his drawing fluttering to the ground, and a smear of chocolate frosting from Blade's hand ended up on his clean shirt. Tears welled in Samuel's eyes, not from pain, but from the shock and the mess on his favorite shirt. He didn't scream or wail, he just stood there, his little lip trembling as he looked down at the brown smudge. I was by his side in an instant, kneeling down. "Oh, sweetie, it's okay. It's just a little frosting. We can clean it up," I murmured, pulling him into a hug. And that's when Vanessa's voice, loud enough for the entire family to hear, boomed across the patio. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," she announced, pointing a finger at us. "A little bump and he's crying. My boys would have just shaken it off and gotten back in the game. Winners shake it off. Whiners need a hug." The world seemed to stop. Every conversation ceased. Every eye turned to me and my son, who was now burying his face in my shoulder, his small body shaking with quiet sobs of humiliation. I could feel my father-in-law's discomfort, my mother-in-law's pained expression, my husband's frozen helplessness. I held my son tighter, my own heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. I looked up, my gaze locking with Vanessa's smug, triumphant stare. She thought she had proven her point. She thought she had won. I took a deep breath, stroking Samuel's hair. I gave him one last squeeze and then looked at my sister-in-law, my voice soft but clear in the sudden silence. "We're all just trying our best, Vanessa." She rolled her eyes, a dismissive flick of her wrist signaling the end of the conversation in her mind. But in that moment, as I held my crying child, publicly shamed for his sensitivity, I understood something with chilling clarity. For Vanessa, trying her best wasn't about raising good children. It was about ensuring that, in her mind, everyone else was losing. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was done letting her win. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Samuel had cried himself to sleep in the back, his stained shirt a small, sad reminder of the afternoon's humiliation. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick with unspoken words and the ghost of Vanessa's cutting laughter. Finally, as we turned onto our quiet, tree-lined street, Thomas spoke, his voice strained. "She goes too far sometimes." "Sometimes," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "Thomas, she called our son a whiner in front of your entire family. She used him to make some sick, twisted point about her own superiority, and nobody said a word." What was I supposed to do, Eden? Flip over the cake table? Start a screaming match? He asked, his frustration evident. "You know how she is. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. It just makes her worse." "So we just let her burn us down? Let her burn down our son?" I shot back, the anger I'd suppressed all day finally bubbling to the surface. "He's a child, Thomas. He's your nephew's brother, and your sister treats him like a prop in her one-woman show about success." He pulled into our driveway and cut the engine, the silence rushing back in, even heavier than before. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dropping. "You're right. I should have said more. I freeze up. She's been like this my whole life. It's easier to just let it roll off." "It's not rolling off me anymore," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "And it's not rolling off Samuel." I gently carried our sleeping son inside, laid him in his bed, and carefully changed him into his pajamas. I sat by his side for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. His sketchpad was on his nightstand, the drawing of the monarch slightly crumpled but still vibrant. He saw beauty in the small, quiet things. Vanessa saw only weakness. Later that night, long after Thomas had gone to bed with a defeated sigh, I found myself in my small home office. It was my sanctuary, a room filled with books on design theory, psychology, and art. It was where I, a person Vanessa saw as unambitious and soft, had quietly built a formidable career. As a user experience designer for one of the world's biggest tech firms, my job was literally to foster empathy, to understand a user's needs, to make complex systems feel intuitive and kind. I was paid very well to do the exact thing Vanessa held in contempt. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen a stark contrast to the dark, quiet house. I didn't open my work files. Instead, I navigated to a bookmarked page, a private portal for my personal investment portfolio. A series of numbers and graphs filled the screen, a silent testament to years of disciplined saving, smart investing, and the significant stock options I'd been granted by my company. It was a secret I kept, not out of shame, but as a form of protection. Thomas knew we were comfortable, but he had no idea of the true extent of my earnings and investments. He was a history teacher. His relationship with money was practical and straightforward. He saw it as a means to pay the mortgage and save for a modest vacation. I saw it as something more: security, independence, and, if necessary, power. I had grown up with a father whose financial recklessness had cost our family everything, and I had vowed to never be in a position of vulnerability again. I lived modestly because I had learned that the appearance of wealth was a liability, a magnet for envy and expectation. As I looked at the numbers, a thought began to form in my mind, cold and clear as a shard of ice. It started as a whisper of an idea, a flicker of rebellion in the face of Vanessa's cruelty. She was so obsessed with the trappings of success, with the brute force of competition. She worshipped at the altar of power, but she only recognized the loud, flashy kind. She would never think to look for it in a quiet room, on a password-protected screen, in the hands of a woman she had written off as gentle and weak. A phrase echoed in my mind, and I held on to it. They saw gentleness as weakness. They had no idea where true strength lies. Vanessa was banking on Northwood to cement her family's status. She was so certain that her methods, her money, and her aggressive ambition were the only keys that could unlock that particular door. The school was a symbol of everything she valued. And in that moment, staring at the numbers that represented my own quiet, patient work, I realized that symbols could be bought. More than that, they could be wielded. I closed the laptop. The anger had receded, replaced by a calm, steely resolve. I would not engage Vanessa on her own terms. I would not get into a shouting match at the next family dinner. I would not stoop to her level of public posturing. My response would be like me: quiet, strategic, and completely unseen until the effects were already in motion. She had thrown down a gauntlet, convinced she was the only one on the field. She had no idea she was playing the wrong game entirely. My relationship with Vanessa had been a masterclass in navigating passive, and not so passive, aggression from the very beginning. When Thomas first introduced us over a decade ago, she had greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a barrage of questions that felt more like an interrogation than a friendly chat. What do you do? Where did you go to school? Where do your parents live? Each answer was met with a non-committal, as if she were entering data into a mental spreadsheet, calculating my worthiness to be with her brother. I was a graphic designer back then, working at a small, creative agency. She, already a rising star in pharmaceutical sales, had made a comment I'd never forgotten. "Oh, that's sweet," she'd said, learning of my job. "An artistic hobby that pays the bills, for a little while anyway." The implication was clear. My career was frivolous, temporary, not a serious pursuit like her own. The battle of values escalated during our wedding planning. I had envisioned a small, intimate ceremony in the botanical gardens. Vanessa pushed for a lavish ballroom at a 5-star hotel. "You have to think about the impression you're making, Eden," she'd argued, cornering me in the kitchen of her sterile, all-white apartment. "A wedding isn't just a party, it's a statement. It tells people who you are." "I was hoping our vows would tell people who we are," I had replied softly, which only earned me a pitying look. We compromised, of course, for Thomas's sake. We ended up with a ceremony that was larger than I wanted and less ostentatious than she demanded, a lukewarm affair that left no one truly happy. When I became pregnant with Samuel, her critiques shifted from my career to my lifestyle. I had made the conscious decision to leave my high-pressure agency job. The hours were grueling, the culture toxic, and I wanted to be present for my child. I transitioned into the burgeoning field of UX design, which offered the flexibility to work from home and a philosophy that aligned with my own empathetic nature. It was also, fortuitously, far more lucrative. But Vanessa didn't see the promotion in quality of life or the financial windfall. She saw only a retreat. "Giving up already?" she'd asked when she heard the news. Most women try to have it all. I guess it's easier to just step back. Thomas must be so proud. Her own parenting journey was a polar opposite to mine. From the moment Jackson was born, he was on a regimented schedule designed to optimize his development. There were flashcards for infants, baby Mozart classes, and a strict, cry-it-out policy that I found heartbreaking. She spoke of her children's achievements as if they were quarterly earnings reports. Jackson is in the 98th percentile for motor skills, she'd announce at family dinners. Blade has an incredibly aggressive spirit. His preschool teacher says he's a natural leader. What I saw was different. I saw two little boys who were rarely allowed to just be children. Their lives were a constant series of lessons, competitions, and evaluations. If they scraped a knee, they were told to tough it out. If they were sad, they were told to get over it. Affection was conned. Ishanal, a reward for performance. Her philosophy was simple. Life is a competition, and her sons would be conditioned to win it. And the ultimate prize, the grand trophy at the end of their meticulously engineered childhood, was Northwood Preparatory Academy. Northwood was more than a school to Vanessa. It was a holy grail. Its ivy-covered brick walls and sprawling, manicured lawns were, in her mind, the physical embodiment of success. The children who walked its halls were the children of senators, surgeons, and CEOs. Its graduates went on to Ivy League universities as a matter of course. For Vanessa, Northwood was not about education, it was about access. It was a brand, and she was determined to stamp it onto her children's lives. She had been planning their admission for years. They lived just outside the official catchment area, so she'd rented a small mailbox in the correct zip code to use on the application. She'd hired a private tutor to prep them for the entrance exams since they were 4. She donated, loudly and publicly, to the school's annual fund every year, ensuring her name was listed in the donor brochure. She was laying siege to the school, convinced that with enough force, its gates would be compelled to open for her boys. Her obsession made me deeply uncomfortable, not just because of its intensity, but because of what it said about her view of the world. She saw life as a zero-sum game. For her children to get into Northwood, other children would be rejected. For her sons to be winners, other children, like mine, had to be labeled whiners. There was no room in her world for collaboration, for diverse strengths, for the simple idea that there are many different paths to a happy and successful life. There was only the Northwood path, and everyone else was on a lesser road. Remembering all this, the memory of her voice cutting across the lawn at the barbecue felt less like a random insult and more like a declaration of war. A war she had been waging against my values, my choices, and my son for a very long time. And as I sat in my quiet office, the pieces of my countermove began to fall into place. It would not be a war of her choosing. It would be a quiet revolution, fought on my own terms, using a power she couldn't even comprehend. A week passed. The sting of the barbecue incident slowly faded into a dull ache, a constant, low-level reminder of Vanessa's cruelty. Thomas was being exceptionally kind, making my coffee in the morning and taking Samuel to the park so I could have some quiet time. It was his silent apology, and I appreciated it, but it didn't change the fundamental problem. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. It was a message from Vanessa. "Incredible news," she wrote, followed by a string of star emojis. Jackson and Blade absolutely nailed their interviews at Northwood today. The head of admissions was so impressed with their confidence, said they were exactly the kind of leaders they're looking for, just a matter of time now. Proud mom winner mindset. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. The smugness, the hashtags, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all, it was the catalyst I needed. The dull ache sharpened into a point of pure, cold focus. My hurt transformed into action. I excused myself from the dinner table, telling Thomas I had a bit of work to finish. In my office, I didn't open my work files. I opened a new browser window and typed Northwood Preparatory Academy into the search bar. Their website was exactly what you'd expect. It was a masterpiece of design, elegant and aspirational. Photos of smiling, diverse students in crisp uniforms dotted the pages. The language was all about community, integrity, and nurturing the whole child. A prominent banner on the homepage featured their motto, Lux et Veritas in Communitate, Light and Truth in Community. The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. Vanessa's methods, the relentless pressure, the focus on domination, the disdain for sensitivity, were the antithesis of everything this school claimed to represent. Yet they were so impressed by her son's confidence. Or were they impressed by Vanessa's aggressive lobbying and conspicuous donations? My investigation deepened. I clicked through the site, moving past the pristine photo galleries and glowing testimonials until I found what I was looking for, the giving section. It was there that the school laid out its fundraising priorities. There was the annual fund Vanessa always contributed to, but there were also larger capital campaigns. One project immediately caught my eye, the Future of Discovery Initiative. They were raising funds to build a brand new, state-of-the-art science and innovation lab. The description was detailed, outlining their vision for a space that would foster curiosity, collaboration, and hands-on learning. They wanted to give students the tools to explore everything from robotics to environmental science. It was a beautiful, noble goal. It was also, I noted, still significantly short of its fundraising target. An idea, fully formed and brilliant, bloomed in my mind. This was it. This was the leverage. My revenge, if you could call it that, would not be a destructive act. It would be a creative one. I wouldn't tear anything down. I would build something up. I would use Vanessa's most coveted institution to validate my own values right under her nose. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I found the contact information for the head of development, a woman named Mrs. Whiner Albright. I began to compose an email, choosing my words with the same care I used when designing a user interface. I needed it to be simple, clear, and intriguing. Subject: Inquiry regarding the future of discovery, initiative. Dear Mrs. Albright, my name is Eden. I am a parent in the community who has been following the progress of Northwood Preparatory Academy with great admiration for its commitment to fostering not just academic excellence, but also strong character and a sense of community. I was particularly impressed to read about the Future of Discovery initiative and the vision for the new Science and Innovation Lab. I believe passionately in the importance of nurturing curiosity and providing students with the resources to explore the world around them. I am in a position to make a significant philanthropic contribution and would be very interested in learning more about how I might be able to help bring this important project to fruition. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Eden. I reread the email 3 times. It was perfect. It was professional, heartfelt, and most importantly, it was vague. It gave no hint of my identity beyond a first name. It positioned me as an ally to the school's highest ideals. With a deep breath, I clicked send. A sense of calm washed over me. The power had shifted. For years, I had been on the defensive, reacting to Vanessa's provocations. Now, I was on the offense. I had initiated a move on a chessboard she didn't even know we were playing on. She was busy celebrating a battle she thought she'd won, while I was quietly preparing to win the war. The beauty of it was that she would never see the attack coming. She was looking for a loud, head-on assault. My victory would be a whisper. The reply from Northwood Preparatory Academy arrived in my inbox less than 24 hours later. It was from Mrs. Albright herself, and its tone was warm and enthusiastic. She thanked me for my interest and proposed a phone call for the following afternoon. My quiet inquiry had landed exactly as I'd hoped. I spent the next day preparing for the call as if it were a major project presentation. I researched the school's endowment, its board of trustees, and Mrs. Albright's own professional history. When my phone rang at 2 o'clock sharp, I was ready. Eden, thank you so much for making the time, Mrs. Albright began, her voice crisp and articulate. I was so pleased to receive your email. It's always wonderful to hear from community members who truly connect with our school's core mission. The pleasure is all mine, Mrs. Albright, I said, keeping my tone calm and professional. Your motto, light and truth in community, is what stood out to me. It suggests a focus on more than just test scores. We certainly strive for that, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We believe that academic rigor and a compassionate, collaborative spirit are two sides of the same coin, which is why the Science and Innovation Lab is so critical. It's about giving our students a space to learn together. This was my opening. I couldn't agree more, I said. Collaboration is key. That's actually the foundation of my professional life. It's about creating systems that are accessible and beneficial for everyone, not just a select few. We spoke for nearly half an hour. I let her guide the conversation, listening as she detailed the plans for the lab, the equipment they hoped to purchase, and the new curriculum it would enable. She was passionate and knowledgeable, and I found myself genuinely impressed. This was the version of Northwood that the brochures promised. You have a remarkable vision, I told her truthfully, and I want to help you realize it. I'm prepared to make a donation that will cover the remaining shortfall for the initiative. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear a faint rustling of papers. Eden, my goodness, she finally said, her professional composure momentarily shaken. That would be a transformative gift. That is incredibly generous. I believe in the project, I said simply, but I do have two conditions. Of course, she said quickly, anything. First, my donation must be completely anonymous, no name. On a plaque, no mention in a brochure. As far as anyone is concerned, the funds came from an anonymous patron. There was another pause. That is an unusual request, but one we will absolutely honor, she said. And the second condition. I've read that Northwood has a scholarship program, I said carefully. I'm sure you have a waiting list of bright, deserving students whose families can't afford the full tuition. We do, she confirmed, her voice tinged with a note of sadness. It's the most difficult part of my job. We have far more qualified applicants than we have funds to support. Then my second condition is this, I said, my heart beating a little faster. I would like a portion of my donation to be used to create a new, full scholarship, effective immediately for the upcoming school year, to be granted to the next child on your waiting list for, say, the second grade. I chose the grade level deliberately. It was the grade Jackson was meant to enter. Mrs. Albright was speechless for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. My dear, you have no idea what that will mean. We have a little girl, an exceptional candidate. Her family has been hoping for a miracle. The final spot in that class has been on hold, pending one last review. This would be their miracle. The final spot. The words hung in the air, perfect and beautiful. Then it seems we have a plan, I said softly. The conversation ended with Mrs. Albright's profuse, heartfelt thanks. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It was done. The trap, a gentle, benevolent trap made of hope and opportunity, was set. The universe, it seems, has a flair for dramatic timing. Not 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Vanessa's name. I let it ring twice before answering, schooling my features into a neutral expression. Eden, she said, her voice sharp and impatient, dispensing with any greeting. I was just thinking, you and Thomas should really apply to Northwood for Samuel. I blinked. Oh. Yes, I mean, he probably wouldn't get in, obviously. His test scores would be, well, you know. But it's important for the school to see that our whole family is invested in the community. It strengthens Jackson and Blade's application. It shows we have a legacy mindset. She wanted to use my son, the Whiner, as a pawn to bolster her own son's chances. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. I'm not sure Northwood is the right fit for Samuel, I said, my voice a carefully crafted mask of polite consideration. Don't be ridiculous, Eden. Northwood is the right fit for everyone who is lucky enough to get in, she snapped. Just submit the application. It doesn't matter if he's rejected. It's the gesture that counts. I'll think about it, I said, the noncommittal phrase a small act of defiance. Don't just think about it, do it, she ordered. Honestly, sometimes getting you to do the simplest thing for this family is like pulling teeth. She hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at my phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. She was so consumed with her own strategy, so busy trying to manipulate everyone around her. She had no idea that the game was already over. She was playing checkers, and I had just executed a flawless checkmate. The days that followed were a quiet exercise in patience. I had set the wheels in motion, and now all I could do was wait for them to turn. I signed the official gift agreement that Mrs. Albright emailed to me, a document that legally bound the school to my conditions of anonymity and the creation of the new scholarship. I made the wire transfer from my investment account, watching the large sum disappear with a sense of profound and utter calm. It was the best money I had ever spent. The stakes felt incredibly high, not because of the money, but because of the principle. I had made a stand, not just against Vanessa, but for a whole set of beliefs. I had bet on kindness over cruelty, on opportunity over entitlement. The case I was building wasn't a legal one, but a moral one. I was proving to myself that my way of living, quietly, thoughtfully, and empathetically, had a power of its own, a power that Vanessa, with all her noise and bluster, could never comprehend. Vanessa, meanwhile, was growing more and more anxious. The confident bravado of her post-interview text message began to curdle into a nervous agitation. Acceptance letters from Northwood were famously sent out on a specific date, and that date was fast approaching. Her messages in the family chat became more frequent and more frantic. "Has anyone heard anything about the Northwood letters?" she texted one morning. "A friend of a friend said her daughter got hers already. They must be sending them out in waves." A day later, the mailman just went by. "Nothing. This is ridiculous. They know who we are. We should have been in the first round of acceptances." Thomas would read these texts aloud to me with a sigh, shaking his head. "She's going to drive herself crazy," he said. "She's already there," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like watching a play whose ending I had already written. The real tension came from keeping my secret. It was a heavy thing to hold all by myself. There were moments I desperately wanted to tell Thomas, to share the delicious irony of the situation with him, but I knew I couldn't. He was a terrible liar, and his goodness would make it impossible for him to face his sister without giving something away. This had to be my secret alone. My power lay in my silence. One evening, Vanessa called me directly, her voice tight with panic. "Eden, I need you to be honest with me. Did you ever call Northwood?" "We spoke about this, Vanessa. I told you I didn't think it was the right fit for Samuel," I said calmly. "But did you call them? Did you say anything negative about me or the boys?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Because it's the only explanation. We haven't heard a thing, and the acceptance date is tomorrow. Someone must have sabotaged us." The paranoia was so profound, it was almost comical. In her world, failure could never be a result of her own shortcomings or just bad luck. It had to be the result of a conspiracy, an act of sabotage by a jealous enemy. It never occurred to her that the enemy might be her own reflection. "Why would I do that, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "Because you're jealous," she spat. "You're jealous of my ambition, you're jealous of my sons, and you're jealous that I'm giving them the best of everything while you're content to let Samuel play with crayons in a corner." The line went quiet for a moment. The accusation hung there, so wildly inaccurate it was almost liberating. She had no idea who I was, what I was capable of, or what I had done. Her insults were based on a fantasy version of me she had constructed to make herself feel superior. "I have to go, Vanessa," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Samuel needs help with his bath." I hung up before she could reply. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart pounding not with fear or anger, but with the thrill of it all. The final pieces were moving into place. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow, the quiet, gentle trap I had so carefully constructed would finally spring shut. The weight of my secret felt different now. It was no longer a burden, but a shield. Her accusations couldn't touch me because I knew the truth. She thought I was jealous of her desperate scramble for a status symbol. She had no idea that I had already bought the whole stadium, rewritten the rules of the game, and declared a winner she would never even meet. And the victory was sweeter than any revenge I could have ever imagined. The showdown, when it came, was not at a raucous barbecue or over a tense holiday dinner. It unfolded, fittingly, in the quiet, beige-toned living room of my in-laws' house during their weekly Sunday lunch. The air in the room was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the overcooked roast beef and everything to do with Vanessa. She had been a storm cloud of anxiety from the moment she walked in the door, her face pale beneath its usual layer of expensive foundation. She barely touched her food, her eyes flitting constantly to the sleek smartphone she had placed face up beside her plate, as if willing it to buzz with the news she was so desperate to receive. Jackson and Blade, sensing their mother's mood, were unusually subdued, poking at their mashed potatoes with a sullen air. Thomas and I exchanged a look across the table. He gave me a small, pained shrug that said, "Just get through this." I gave him a tiny, reassuring nod. Samuel, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to the drama, happily chatting with his grandfather about the different types of rockets. The afternoon wore on. My father-in-law tried to make conversation about politics. My mother-in-law asked about my garden. Every topic seemed to fizzle out, unable to compete with the palpable anticipation radiating from Vanessa's end of the table. And then it happened. Her phone vibrated against the polished wood of the dining table, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. Vanessa snatched the phone up, her movements sharp and jerky. Her eyes scanned the screen her breath held. We all watched, frozen, as a silent movie played out on her face. The flicker of hope, the dawning confusion, the slow, crumbling devastation. The mask of supreme confidence she wore so carefully didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. "No," she whispered, the word a small, hollow puff of air. "No, it's a mistake." "What is it, dear?" my mother-in-law asked gently. Vanessa looked up, her eyes wide and unseeing. She seemed to have forgotten we were all there. "They're full," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "The class is full. They're placing Jackson and Blade on the waiting list." The term waiting list was poison on her tongue. It was a purgatory for the not quite good enough, a polite rejection she had never in her wildest dreams imagined for her own children. It says the final open spot was just filled," she stammered, reading from the email. "Thanks to a sizable anonymous donation from a new patron that allowed them to offer a last-minute scholarship." Her voice broke on the word scholarship. To her, it was a word associated with charity, with need, with everything she had fought so hard to rise above. She looked around the table, her gaze wild and searching, as if looking for someone to blame. "It's not possible. My boys are leaders. The head of admissions told me so herself. This is a mistake, or it's politics. Someone with more influence must have pulled a string." Thomas, ever the dutiful brother, stood up and went to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Van. Maybe you can call them tomorrow." She shrugged him off, her face contorting into a mask of rage. "Don't you get it? It's over. Some charity case took my son's spot. Some whiner who couldn't get in on their own merit." The word hung in the air, a poisonous echo of the insult she had thrown at my son. But this time, it had no power. It was just the desperate lashing out of a woman whose meticulously constructed world had just collapsed. I remained silent, my hands resting in my lap. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my roast beef, which now tasted surprisingly delicious. I watched as the architect of her own misery came to terms with a failure she couldn't comprehend. She had done everything right according to her own brutal rulebook. She had pushed, she had prepped, she had paid. She had been aggressive and loud and relentless. She couldn't understand that the world didn't always bend to the will of the loudest person in the room. My moment of triumph wasn't loud or public. It was a quiet, internal hum of satisfaction. It was the profound peace of knowing I had not stooped to her level. I had not engaged in her ugly game. Instead, I had used my resources to create a positive outcome, to reward the very values she despised. A little girl was going to get a world-class education because I had chosen to answer cruelty with quiet, constructive power. Vanessa eventually dissolved into bitter, angry tears, grabbing her purse and her children and storming out of the house, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. In the aftermath, Thomas walked over to me. He looked at the empty space where his sister had been, then he looked at me, his eyes full of a new understanding. I met his gaze and gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. In that silent exchange, he didn't know what I had done, but I think he finally saw the steel beneath my gentle exterior. He finally saw my strength. And in the wreckage of his sister's ambition, our own foundation felt stronger than ever. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from what the family began calling the Northwood incident settled into a new, tense normal. Vanessa did not handle her defeat with grace. She enrolled Jackson and Blade in the second-best private school, a place she had previously referred to as a glorified daycare for the children of dentists. She complained about it constantly, finding fault with the teachers, the curriculum, and the other parents. She was a woman adrift, having lost the North Star of her ambition, and she was determined to make everyone around her as miserable as she was. Her relationship with us became strained to the breaking point. She avoided family gatherings, and when she couldn't, she treated me with a cold, simmering hostility. In her mind, I was somehow the symbol of her failure. My quiet contentment, my gentle son, my unassuming life, it was all an affront to her. She had built her identity on the idea that her way was the only way to win, and my happiness without it was a truth she could not accept. One evening, about a month after the fateful Sunday lunch, Thomas came into my office and sat on the edge of my desk. He watched me for a moment as I sketched out a wireframe for a new app interface. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Vanessa." I stopped drawing and gave him my full attention. "I spent my whole life making excuses for her," he said, looking at his hands. "Telling myself, that's just Van, letting her run roughshod over everyone because it was easier than confronting her. At the barbecue, I was a coward. I let her hurt you and Samuel, and I did nothing. I am so sorry for that, Eden." Tears pricked my eyes. It was the apology I hadn't even realized I was still waiting for. "She's so focused on this idea of winning," he continued, "that she doesn't see how much she's losing. She's losing her family. She's Losi. And G herself. And watching you, you have this quiet strength I never fully appreciated before. You never let her change who you are." I reached out and took his hand. "We're a team, Thomas. That's all that matters." In that moment, the last vestiges of the secret's weight lifted. I knew I would never tell him what I did, not because I didn't trust him, but because it was no longer necessary. The outcome I had wanted wasn't just to block Vanessa, it was to protect my own family's peace. And we had found it. The true resolution, however, arrived a few days later in a small, cream-colored envelope addressed to me in elegant cursive. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Mrs. Albright on Northwood Preparatory Academy letterhead. "Dear Eden, I know we agreed on complete anonymity, and I will continue to honor that promise in every public capacity. But I had to write to you personally to express my deepest, most heartfelt gratitude. Your gift has already changed a life." We were able to offer the new, anonymous family scholarship to a truly remarkable 7-year-old girl. She is a brilliant, curious child with a passion for science who dreamed of coming to Northwood but never thought it possible. Her family was overjoyed, to put it mildly. I thought you might like to see this. It was in her admissions portfolio. She said she wanted to be an astronomer. Tucked inside the card was a photocopy of a child's drawing. It depicted the solar system, with planets meticulously colored in and labeled in wobbly, earnest printing. In the corner, a tiny astronaut with a bright pink helmet waved from the window of a spaceship. I stared at the drawing, a slow, wide smile spreading across my face. This was my victory. Not Vanessa's tears, not her public failure, but this piece of paper. This proof that a small act of quiet defiance could ripple out and become an act of creation, of opportunity, of joy. I had answered her declaration that she was raising winners, not whiners, by making a true winner out of a deserving child she would never meet. That evening, I found Samuel in the living room, sprawled on the floor with his own sketchbook. I lay down beside him, the scent of waxy crayons filling the air. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" I asked. "A city on the moon," he said, not looking up from his detailed work. "Everyone is friends, and there are no bullies allowed." I put my arm around his small shoulders and pulled him into a hug, resting my cheek on the top of his head. He was right. We were all just trying our best. But I had learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do is use your strength not to win a fight, but to quietly build a better world, even if it's just for one person. And in our peaceful, happy home, far from the noise of Vanessa's endless competition, I knew without a doubt that we had already won.